Hi, my name is David Friedman. I'm an associate at BFK Law, and I am joined today with Ben Goldman, who is a metaverse artist, creator, and advisor. Ben has served as an advisor for Sequin AR, and Ben is also the co-founder of Metaverse TV. Ben, thank you very much for being here and for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, David.
I should mention Ben is one of my oldest friends, so it's worth noting.
You're certainly
And
my
if you're
oldest friend, so
and if you're confused by the background, we will discuss that soon. So, so Ben, we spoke a little bit. So our law firm is trying to open up a virtual law office in the metaverse. Now, we don't know what that means. We're throwing around big fancy words. We pretty much just heard Facebook talk about the metaverse, and we've been seeing a lot of NFTs and thought we would explore this space a little bit more. Given your expertise, would love to talk to you about the metaverse and really what it is or is not, or if it is just a fancy term.
sure.
So, what is the metaverse?
Well, there's a few different ways to think about it. The most surface definition of the metaverse that I like is that the metaverse ultimately describes a network of virtual worlds, right? So if you think of it in the context of the internet of today, we go to different websites. Well, in the metaverse, you might be going to different virtual worlds, right? But they're all connected through a network. And so parts of the metaverse are made up of technologies that already exist. There are already virtual worlds and have been for decades, right? But it's also made up of technologies that don't yet exist, such as the whole networking component. Right now, there is no way to make virtual worlds easily interoperable, so that way a player can travel from world to world. On a deeper level, though, the metaverse kind of describes what many people, including myself, believe is the next phase of our digital landscape, which is the transition from interacting with, primarily 2D interfaces, 2D designs, to an immersive, three-dimensional, virtual kind of internet. And so that's kind of what the metaverse means in a nutshell. And then you can always go deeper and deeper. There's different interpretations, but that's kind of it on a surface level.
So, from what I'm understanding, is the metaverse is this essentially virtual reality?
No, virtual reality is one of the ways through which people will likely access the metaverse. But the metaverse,
Will my cat be able to join the metaverse? Is meowing for dinner.
yeah, well, there is a famous comic that says in the metaverse, no one knows you're a dog. Um, um, but yeah, so so basically, I forget, what was the question.
So it's about whether it's like virtual reality. So
So
you're describing, like, are you in the metaverse right now, or you pretty much have augmented reality behind you? I mean, if I go and I just go to, you know, um, backgrounds, did I just enter the metaverse with you?
like, it is kind of a debate whether or not the metaverse can exist without technology, whether it might be something closer to a state of mind. But that gets a little bit metaphysical pretty quickly. So virtual reality is one of the ways through which people will likely access the metaverse, but it is not the metaverse itself. Like, just like today, people access the internet through a number of different devices, whether a smartwatch or a phone or a PC or a tablet. People will be able to access the metaverse in different levels of fidelity through different devices. Um,
So
and
like
so
what, sorry, go ahead.
VR is one of the devices that makes the most sense, because the end game of the metaverse is full immersion, right? We want people, ultimately it describes the kind of technology that immerses people, um, and so when you think of it in that light, virtual reality makes intuitive sense because it is completely immersive. or it's at least one of the most immersive technologies that we have available. So it'll likely play a very important role in the metaverse, but my prediction is that more people will be using their phones than using a VR headset.
Sort of like Snapchat or
Yeah, or sort of like,
or Pokemon Go or
well,
whatever.
if you think about it today, a huge portion of today's youth, their main social platform for hanging out with friends are games like Fortnite or Call of Duty Mobile or Roblox. Um, and so people are already used to kind of accessing these worlds through mobile devices. And given that everybody on the planet mostly has a mobile device, it'll likely be the most popular entry point for a large number of people.
So if there's a video game and you have your, your PlayStation or your Xbox or whatever video game console, instead of playing the video game, is it sort of like wandering around a metaverse? Is a metaverse just one? Are there many metaverses?
Yeah,
You
we
know, is,
that's one
yeah,
of the
no,
questions. That's one of the questions. Whether or not there's one metaverse or many is one of the questions that we don't know yet. I believe there'll probably be many metaverses, um, but we that's just one of those things we don't know in terms of like what the user experience will be like. I think that you can kind of intuit the trajectory that it's going just by looking at some of the most popular games today. So you have games like Grand Theft Auto Online, which has been around for 8 years, right? So, or Fortnite, which has millions and millions of players and is already starting to introduce concerts and live experiences into the game. And so, if you follow this trajectory towards its natural conclusion, the lifespan of some of these games will continue to evolve, the use cases will continue to expand, and at some point games will stop becoming annual releases and they'll become persistent platforms that ultimately pave the way to the metaverse. Now, I do want to make a distinction that a game is not the metaverse. A game is not a virtual world. Games are contained within virtual worlds, but they're not the metaverse itself. But eventually once these properties they become persistent and they become connected, that's when we'll be able to make a strong case that the metaverse exists.
so for, I mean, is this almost like a multiverse coming together? I mean, it's Grand Theft Auto, for example, right? I think it's a game you're actually walking around streets, right?
Yeah.
You're driving around cars. You are shopping for items within whatever city that Grand Theft Auto takes place in.
Yeah.
Is that right? You know, to kind of highlight what it might look like, we're talking about a city landscape or something of that sort where it's not really revolving around a game necessarily, but that we enter and exist in. Whether that is buying our apartments or our clothing to represent ourselves, having avatars to have images of ourselves. What, I guess, what would we be doing in that world? What brings people into that world? Like, what is the actual draw? And really the main point that I'm driving towards is there really any point to even opening a law office in the metaverse? Or are we just going to get 6-year-olds writing up to see what this shop is?
Yeah, well, I think to the question about whether or not it makes sense to open up a law office, I think it depends on who you intend to serve. Like, if there is a growing community of Web3 advocates and crypto enthusiasts, and those kinds of people will likely find value in working with a law firm that does have a presence in the metaverse and gets it at that level. Um, but probably wouldn't make sense to open up a law firm in Fortnite because then you will just be getting kids, and also the
Well, they might
logistics.
have a bunch of assault issues. So
They might, and then the other thing is, Epic Games, the creator of Fortnite, they're one of the biggest proponents of the metaverse, but Fortnite is not yet a metaverse, right? It's not open. There are no rights over in-game assets. And so it doesn't yet have the infrastructure, the legal infrastructure to actually operate as a metaverse.
so what, if any, metaverses are there right now? Are there any?
Yeah, I
Or-
don't believe, no, I don't believe that I don't believe that the metaverse exists yet, at least by the technical definition. Um, I do believe that it's starting to take form, but it's really, you can almost imagine it like, like a fungus starting to spread and connect, but it's not yet there. And so the metaverse doesn't yet exist, but there are some contenders that are essentially trying to create virtual worlds that are metaverse ready. So, for example, Decentraland is a crypto based virtual world where anybody can go in, they can buy property, they can customize their avatars, they can open up businesses. Um, but again, it's ultimately a virtual world, and the metaverse is a network of virtual worlds. So until some of these virtual worlds begin to become interoperable in the sense that a player can move from one to the next, a metaverse can't be said to really exist quite yet.
So what would you call these then? Something like a Decentraland, or, is it Roblox? Is that another one? Right? There's a handful of these, right?
Yeah, I would say that they're either prototype metaverses or they're metaverse enabled virtual worlds, in the sense that, like, they have their eye on one day being interoperable, so that way players can move between them, and being connected, but and they're moving towards that, but that does not yet exist.
And so, I guess what are the most popular ones right now? And if one, there's a trend now, you see people buying real estate in these different, I don't know what to call them. They're not worlds. You call what would you call it?
Yeah, a virtual world.
A virtual world. Um, so is it right now just pure speculation? Buying up in these to maybe see if this becomes a centralized place within a future metaverse?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, is that people are kind of betting that these metaverse native virtual worlds will be amongst the first to really take off. And so when you look at some of the most popular ones, there's Decentraland, like I mentioned. There's also one called Sandbox. And then there's also a number of like other projects that are taking off: Victoria VR, Star Atlas, that they're essentially creating virtual worlds. They're blockchain enabled. And I think, like, one of the reasons that the Web3 or crypto community has become so central is that they believe they provide a key missing ingredient to the infrastructure of the metaverse, which is how do you enable these robust economies that are decentralized, so they're not under one centralized owner, and how do you provide the infrastructure for people to be able to own digital assets and then carry those digital assets with them as they move between these worlds.
And
Um,
these are the NFTs, and I guess being done by getting your receipt via blockchain between the different worlds. Is that?
Yeah, and I think, like, one of the reasons that the NFT space, like right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, right? They say, like, well, I can just screenshot. It doesn't mean anything. Like, sure, you own this receipt, but it doesn't mean anything in the real world, and that's true. But the reason that community overlaps so heavily with the metaverse community is because when you look at it through the lens of the metaverse, suddenly these things make a lot of sense. So, does it make sense for me in 2022 to buy a battle axe NFT? It may not make sense, right? What use is it going to be? But if you were to program an entire virtual world to recognize these rules, to recognize the blockchain and digital ownership, then suddenly it might make sense because you have a practical use for that battle axe. So
Well, what's the practical use?
you might be able to use it inside of a virtual world to attack your enemies. you know so a lot of these things, they don't make as much sense in the real world, but then they make a lot more sense once you translate it over into a virtual world that's been written from scratch to recognize these different paradigms.
Well, and I mean, on top of that, I imagine these are your artists and architects of this future world. If they're designing certain buildings and certain art forms, you want a certain form of ownership over those, right? That artist and that design to make it special. I mean, hypothetically, we can be wandering a art museum within a metaverse of all sorts of amazing virtual NFTs.
Yeah. Well, and this gets to your earlier question about like, well, what do you do in the metaverse? The best way to answer that is like, well, what do you do on the internet today? There's a lot of things that you do that may not make as much sense to translate over. So does it make as much sense to, for example, translate a banking app into the metaverse? Maybe not, because it's purely transactional. People just want to like send money or receive money and have it over with. But when you think about things like social media, right? Interacting with people, work meetings, learning, right? These human experiences that innately benefit from presence and immersion, and being around other people, those make a lot more sense in the metaverse than they do today. And with today's internet, and this is one of the reasons that I think Mark Zuckerberg has bet the future of his company on the metaverse, because he understands at a primal level that social media makes way more sense in the metaverse than it does, using an app like Facebook.
Right. I mean, and I think Bill Gates was just quoted as saying in about 2 years, we will likely be having meetings in the metaverse,
That's right.
which, given what you're telling me, we don't even really have a metaverse yet. So,
Yeah,
so
well,
this,
people so like there is, like
Ben,
when
I
I
just want to know where we need to open up our law office.
sure. And when I describe the metaverse as a network of virtual worlds, that's like a very textbook definition of it, right? But it is also being the definition is changing because it is being used to describe a more broad macro trend of games and immersive technologies evolving into this new iteration. And so some people are using it much more loosely just to describe like an immersive internet, right? Not necessarily the textbook definition. When it comes to opening up a law office, like I think that in many ways you have to judge it as you would any other crypto project. Like, who are the creators of it? What's the outlook? How engaged is the community? And you have to kind of like follow where the people are going. And right now, there's like, so you could do something like Decentraland. It's pretty sparse. It's not very engaging. Sandbox is trying to improve that. But these all could be the foundations for something better.
I guess it's also important to maybe distinguish in whatever this metaverse may be, we are to move around it and experience it similar to the actual real physical, like real world, right? Or is it we are flying through space and going to different planets and whatever it may be, or we're actually moving down the street, passing by retail storefronts, passing by buildings and our neighbors, and or is it just going to be kind of cosmic?
No, I think that you're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the most powerful ways of looking at the metaverse is that ultimately it's mapping over the real world into a virtual world. And one of the innate benefits of the metaverse is that it uses much more human frames of reference, frames of reference that humans have spent, millennia of developing, right? Like space, time, identity. And so in this way, the technology becomes our interaction with technology is much, much more proximate to our own reality. So it becomes more intuitive. So to give you a simple example, if you're a kid and suddenly you're thrust into online school, right now you have to learn how to use Google Docs and Zoom, and you have to learn how to use, Sheets and a half a dozen different homework platforms, right? But in the metaverse, what it's saying is, well, we could replace all of that, and a kid could walk down a street, enter into his school building, find his classroom, sit down at his desk next to his peers, and watch his teacher. That's a much more human way of learning, right? It's very similar to how people learn in the real world, and so
We're
that's
not
what.
going to just put on a VR set and like press the school button and then suddenly be in a almost virtual Zoom office or virtual Zoom classroom and then have our lesson. We're actually going to have to like go through the time to move around. If we opened up a law office, there's like actual street traffic to pass by and see it, or
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the ways that you should be thinking about where to open up the law office, right? It's like if you were to open up a law office in a new city, what might you look at? You might look at the demographics of the people in a certain area. You might look at how much foot traffic is in a certain area. You might look at like how much crime there is, right? It's the same thing in a metaverse. You'll want to look at which virtual worlds have the most people, who's the people that are logging into those virtual worlds, what kind of systems do they have in place to discourage crime and scams, and then make those same calculations but inside of a virtual world.
It's very interesting. And what are you working on now with the metaverse? So even with Metaverse TV, is that watching television in the metaverse? Is that creating digital assets in the metaverse?
Yeah, so it gets back to what I was saying, where you can think of the metaverse as, I call it a Manhattan Project for the age of video games, but basically it's the goal is to start to port over aspects of the real world into the virtual world, right? And so the driving principle behind Metaverse TV is that anytime there have ever been people settling a new land, settling a new nation, establishing a new society, the media plays a fundamental role in that. And it's going to play a fundamental role in the metaverse as well. So the Metaverse TV is our it's a creative collective that we are working to build the metaverse's first TV network and establish the first media ecosystem inside the metaverse.
And so you would go in, I'm not even totally clear on how we even access the metaverse, to be honest. I guess that's kind of through our computers or our cell phones, or maybe a virtual reality headset or an AR headset. That's really our only access, right? I don't even know if I can do it from a desktop, can I? Or does it have to be from
Yeah, you
their
can. I
phone?
mean, like, for example, the Sandbox client runs on PC. Yeah, you're most likely these days you would be using a PC. There isn't really a metaverse on a game console, or I don't know if there's any of them really running well on a phone. There might be a few, but
So, and then we'd enter, maybe watch a production while in the metaverse, and even maybe have an advertisement for like land available on this side of town within that kind of possibly decentraland or whatever city or structure is being created.
that's right. With Metaverse TV, the goal is that just like in the real world, you might have a live studio audience, but then also be broadcasting out to millions of TV set boxes for people that can't be there in person. And then with Metaverse TV, all of the productions, you would be able to have people there as avatars observing the production, because we're using a technique called virtual production, which is staging productions inside of a game engine. Um, but then the content itself could also be distributed more widely. So, yeah.
So did you find a studio space? Do you have a space within the metaverse, or do you not need one? Or are you
You technically don't need one. You could do it entirely virtual, meaning that using something like a simple phone, you could be using facial tracking of an avatar, of a 3D avatar, and maybe using a controller, he could be moving around the set. Um, so you technically don't even need the space, but we are partnering with a virtual production company, and we will have a space.
it's awesome. It's awesome. Um, Trying to think if I have any other questions or thoughts. I'm sure I missed plenty. I'm still not totally sure if the metaverse makes any sense to me, but this is a journey to kind of learn about it and see what it is, because we've been hearing so much about the metaverse. Um,
Yeah, and
you
it's
know,
normal for it not to make sense right now because it doesn't yet exist. But the point is, you don't, like, what I always tell people is they don't have to astral project into a distant future and imagine what's going to happen. All one has to do is look at the trends that are already in place today. Games are rapidly becoming, they've already become the dominant form of entertainment on the planet. They're beginning to subsume other forms of entertainment, meaning like concerts inside of Fortnite. They even did a screening of the movie Inception inside of Fortnite, right? If you Grand Theft Auto Online, people are already buying clothes and cars and apartments, right? MMOs like World of Warcraft are older than Twitter, right? And so if you start to imagine like where this is, if this trend continues to accelerate, right, what's going to happen is that these immersive experiences will continue to grow. They'll become more persistent. More people will come into them. And at some point, those economies will be codified using something like the blockchain, and they'll become very real. And once those economies become real, that's going to spark like a supernova explosion of interest into space, because it will no longer just be about hanging out with your friends, but it could be about starting your next business or meeting up with your old high school classmates or whatever, right? Going to see the new U2 concert, right? All of that.
Going shopping and trying on clothes.
That's right. Yeah.
It
Or
is
opening up
wild.
a law office.
Well, really, we need to figure out where to get land and how any of that works, but we will figure that out at a different time as far as any of those deeds, transactions, blockchain, bitcoins, whatever you use to pay for it, whatever you're getting in return, whatever that ownership looks like.
Yep.
It's a very weird world, but it
It's a
sounds
very
very
weird.
cool and it sounds very exciting.
It's weird and only getting weirder.
Well, hopefully, once they all kind of combine and that fungus grows one into the next, it'll make sense.
Yes.
Um, and thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for your insights and for explaining what the metaverse is to us.
My pleasure, David. Happy to be of service and happy to continue the conversation anytime.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Happy New Year's.